Welcome to the Rethinking Humanity podcast, where we dive deeper into what makes us human and what causes us to thrive. I'm Lacey Delane.
Hi, I'm Sonya Larrea.
And we are so excited to have you guys for episode 41. It is Alienation, Bureaucracy, and Consumption. There's a lot there, as you can imagine, just by hearing the title. But we're glad to be back. We took a little minute break, but we're here. We're not going anywhere. Sonya, what's up, girl?
Well, we're back. I missed it. I was doing some traveling, so I was kind of out of pocket, and God, the time just went by.
It really did.
Yeah, we kept talking about doing this, and then every minute would go by, and now we're back. But it's good. It's good to be back. Yeah.
It's good to be back. I think it's also the reality of like the pace of life picking back up post pandemic or post lockdown. We're not out of the pandemic yet, but right. Post lockdown. And so I think our schedules were slowly picking back up. And then about the time we've just, did our last episode, it was just like, picking back up to much more normal pace. Although, as you know, I've said, I'm only working 30 hours a week, people, because I want to have some type of a quality of life and work-life balance. So, but still, even in that, it's amazing how hard it's been. It can be at times to really find time to do stuff. I mean, when you're not paid to do this, it's really, you have to be very intentional about wanting to do it. And you also just have to be kind of lucky enough to have the time for it and not have other things pulling.
Yeah. And I know we both have used the word busy that we don't like to use, but I mean, our world that we live in, it's just, unfortunately, that's kind of the lifestyle in the United States is you're busy. Even if you are working part-time, you're busy.
That is correct.
You have to do other stuff, don't you?
That is correct. Isn't that wild? I mean, we don't talk about that on this podcast at all, do we?
Yeah, right.
It is actually funny that you mentioned that, because one of the things I've realized since going to this 30-hour work week, which I'm happy about that I did it, but I still feel like it's crazy. I still feel like I don't have enough time to really have space to like let things be spontaneous, let life happen, give myself space to be creative and be, journal, meditate, and,
I hear you. They've done studies. It's interesting you say that about part-time. Even with part-time work, people are still overwhelmed. And I know we've touched on this so much in the podcast, but it's like the culture that we live in doesn't really support us doing other things other than working.
Right. We're going to talk about that.
Absolutely.
Today. Fromm talks in this next chapter of The Sane Society, Man in Capitalistic Society. He talks about how much it just consumes our lives, work. And we're conditioned to believe that this is the only thing. And also, an article that we're going to discuss as well. So anyways, more of the wonderful topics tonight that we normally talk about, but we've just been kind of getting back to a more, I don't know, normal, more typical rhythm of life in this society. And, I've been in the gym again, which has been so nice, and playing soccer again, which has been so nice. So that's great. But yeah, it's good to be back and good to be here. And we're excited. We're going to be pulling from multiple different sources today and kind of do things a teensy bit differently, not terribly, but a teensy bit differently.
Yeah. And I wanted to remind viewers who maybe are just tuning in, or if they forgot, that this is the book, Erich Fromm, The Sane Society, that we're talking about. There's a lot of good stuff in here.
Yes.
And all of Erich Fromm's material is good.
Man, let me tell you something. We talked a little bit about The Art of Loving, which is another one of his books, in February of this year. Yeah. Man, this year went by fast. Anyway, but I have to say that there's parts of that book that are towards the end that are incredible, and they line up so well with the themes that we've already discussed and that we do discuss on the podcast. So it's everywhere. In fact, I have The Art of Loving here, just in case, I have like my little tabs here in
Yeah.
case we, spontaneously talk about something that kind of overlaps with that. So yes, we're on the same track. We just highly recommend his stuff. If you like what we're talking about, you're likely going to enjoy his writings.
Absolutely. Well, what we were going to do tonight for people is I'm going to read some of Fromm's statements in here in this chapter, The Man in Capitalistic Society, and then we're going to chat about it. So we ready, Lacey?
I'm ready. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. All right. So the first part I'm going to read here is, work is becoming more repetitive and thoughtless as the planners, the micro-motionists, and the scientific managers further strip the worker of his right to think and move freely. Life is being denied. Need to control, creativeness, curiosity, and independent thought are being balked, and the inevitable result is flight or fight on the part of the worker, apathy or destructiveness, psychic regression. So let's start with that.
There's a lot there, huh?
There's a lot to unpack there.
I mean, let's just start at the end. Psychic regression. I mean, you tell me if you think that some of our ability to focus now post social media and all of technology hasn't decreased. I would say, as someone who worked with kids and has been working in the school system previously, and I've definitely watched technology have an impact on a child's ability to just be present in the moment. You know what I'm saying? Like enjoy a story, but versus like, oh my gosh, I'm so used to being stimulated. YouTube videos. This is boring.
Right. I don't think we even know yet what the impact's going to be. Like 20 years from now, we'll see, say, the generation when they've grown up, how, this environment is affecting them. What sticks out to me about this paragraph is where he talks about work being repetitive and thoughtless, which I think there's a lot of jobs that we see that. And I think where he also brings up the part about life being denied. Yes. If you think about being in a working environment that you aren't really being, I don't want to say fulfilled, because not everything you do is going to be necessarily fulfilling, but if it creates apathy and you're just sort of like, I think we've talked about this from being an automaton, you're just kind of going through the motions and you're really separate from the work. It's just, you're doing a task. Repeatedly over and over. And this was written, I think, was it in the 50s?
55.
Yeah.
55.
So he's talking about that then. And so you see already that he's talking about themes that we're confronted with today. And obviously this was with the Industrial Revolution that this started. But it's just that the worker, I think, loses like his humanity, right? Being in these environments.
Yeah, I think the repetitiveness is a big deal, and the extracting the process from a worker and putting them in one piece of the process of something. So I'll give an example. I'm going to use an events example. So let's say that I'm, doing an event. And I'm helping someone, and I'm going to plan the event, and I'm going to be at the event, and I'm going to run the event. If my only role is to just, I don't know, set up the chairs, that's the only thing I'm supposed to do, is set up the chairs at the event, I'm going to be a lot less worried about whether the chairs are great and they are what the person wants at the event than if I'm was at the beginning, had a conversation with the people. This is the kind of event they want to have. These are the kind of people. This is the kind of atmosphere, the vibe, the blah, blah, blah. And then I'm with them through the whole process from the beginning to the end. Now, obviously, this is different than an example that Fromm would have used, maybe building a table or a chair. And you're only just the person just sticking the leg in the table or a chair. And so it's very easy to become alienated from the process or disinterested or just numb to the whole thing, because it's like, wow, I'm putting there's no purpose there's no deeper meaning and there's no human connection behind what's happening.
I would even say there's lack of accountability. The alienation is good, excellent. And I'm going to get into like the bureaucracy part. But what makes me think of your example, I think it's a great example, AC, is then if you're the person just doing the chairs, you don't care about anything else. And you just care that you get paid for that. And have you ever heard people say, well, I did my part and I got my money. I don't care. Like, I don't care what the outcome is. I don't care who I'm affecting, if it hurts people, if it helps people. So that to me makes me think of alienating. You're alienated from from humanity, from other people, because you're not part of the whole picture, right?
Yeah, it's funny. This is reminding me of something that happened. I think it was today, but definitely this week. So I was leaving the gym, and I went through this stoplight that, if you aren't close enough to it, you really can't see it. And someone obviously decided to put another light, an additional light, like a little further up before you go around the corner, so you could see ahead of time what was going on. And I was thinking, wow, like that was thoughtful of them to do that. And I was thinking, like obviously somebody really cared about this intersection because they decided that they wanted to do that and make it extra safe. And I thought, I wonder who that person was. And then I thought, most people probably don't think about that. They don't think about there was actually a person behind that decision of like caring to put a light closer up. And it's like, instead we don't think in that way about these types of things. We just think, oh, that's the Department of Transportation that's in charge of that. Right. But in reality, there's a human, and there are humans who care more, maybe, who are more passionate about their work, or I don't know, however you want to say it. And it just reminded me, and this kind of connects to the bureaucracy part, of how much we have decoupled work from individuals, and we've coupled it with a big bureaucratic organization. And that makes it easier for people not to take responsibility or get credit for,
Yeah. When you were talking about this, what I was thinking about is that we're not thinking in a collective way. We're thinking in a selfish, individual way. And the negative of that is that all of our actions affect, other people. When we're going to a store, or all the things that we do, just our day-to-day life, there's a whole process behind the things that we do and how we get what we need, whether it's, your food or your, goods. And we're just so disconnected from that. So to me, that's the alienation. And then if you take that, the next step, what you're talking about, the bureaucracy is, and I'm sure everyone can relate to this, we've all dealt at one time or another with bureaucracy. And we see how challenging it is to get anything done. And then I even feel bad sometimes for the people in those environments, because if you're stuck in that environment, you just have a limited role. Like, you're not allowed to make a decision.
You're just doing the chairs.
You're just doing the chairs. Exactly. Right. So you're powerless, right? And that we have a lot of institutions that are that way. So it just, it hurts, it hurts a lot, all of us, I guess, basically.
Yeah. I love too about this paragraph that you read, life is being denied. And I think there's so much depth here, because I think for many people who are used to a society like ours that is so entrenched in work and workism, that could be a sentence that is very difficult to understand the deeper meaning behind. But life is being denied because, I think I've mentioned this before, but when we're not autonomous, we're not alive. Like we there's so much more to life than typing on a screen and receiving emails and responding and doing something that's not from the core of our being. Does that make sense? Like, going to a job, we're doing it because we're trying to just feed ourselves and eat and whatever. It's not like I woke up this morning and I wanted to do a cartwheel. So I just learned how to do a cartwheel. You know what I'm saying? And that's more valuable because it's comes from inside. It's intrinsic, right? And so there's so much more to this too than just the autonomy. There's also the connection to other people, just time spent together. I mean, relationships, conversations, connection, love. I mean, there's a lot that we don't make space for with how obsessed we are. Yes.
And I think it all goes back to, we're not getting rewarded for those things that you're talking about. We're getting rewarded to do the job where we need the money in order to live. So it's just, it's challenging.
I tweeted something that I think fits this. I'm going to read it from my Twitter. It's at Lacey Delane if anybody wants to follow me. But I tweeted this as I said, the joy of life is in knowing and being known, experiencing and being experienced. In other words, in being. And so I think that there's a connection there to life being denied, because how can you know and be known whenever you're scared to be vulnerable and open up and be genuine and talk to people, because society has conditioned you in that way. And you don't even have time to know who you are and be vulnerable and talk to somebody about how you really feel and have, a deep connection with another person, because you're too busy working or running around doing something that's related to work. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. So, this is a thing.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm going to go on to a next paragraph that I have here. Okay. This paragraph is actually quoting an author called Drucker. Peter Drucker wrote Concept of the Corporation, just so that people know where I'm coming from here. As Drucker puts it very succinctly, in fine, it is the large corporation, the specific form in which big business is organized in a free enterprise economy, which has emerged as the representative and determining socioeconomic institution, which sets the pattern and determines the behavior even of the owner of the corner cigar store, who never owned a share of stock, and of his errand boy who never set foot in a mill. And thus the character of our society is determined and patterned by the structural organization of big business, the technology of the mass production plant, and the degree to which our social beliefs and promises are realized in and by the large corporations. So what do you think of when you hear that, Lacey?
Yeah. I mean, what I'm hearing is that corporate world, big business corporations are so much more impactful to our way of life than we even realize. I mean, it's very obvious that big business is squelching out small business, right? And I think
Amazon.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there are certain people, pundits on TV, who love to say, oh, America's all about small businesses. But if you look, that's not what's happening at all. And, no. FYI, basic income would do a hell of a job of helping small businesses. But the reality is this is true. And again, people, he's saying this in 1955. So it was already happening to an extent in 1955 that was visible to the thinking person. It's just gotten more and more and more and more now in 2021. So yeah, that's what it makes me think is, like big businesses really, really have such a huge impact on our day-to-day way of life. That, I think, is a big takeaway from that paragraph.
Yeah, I don't think we have an awareness of how much we are affected. And what I like that he talks about is that our social beliefs and promises are realized in and by the large corporations. We don't realize how much the corporations are influencing us. At this point, when he's, discussing this, he's talking about the mass production plant, which of course we know that exists in our day and age. He couldn't even imagine the companies that are the most powerful today, which we know are like the Facebooks, the Googles, all of the tech companies that are literally, influencing our behavior.
Well, it's funny because before we started the show, I was like, hey, let's think of some examples on this, Sonya. And, and you said, social media. And I'm like, such a great point. You don't have to think too hard about it. I mean, I don't know. How many times have you been out in public? I know this has happened to me so many times, and people are waiting for something. Let's say they're waiting for a table at a restaurant. Let's say they're waiting for the elevator. Let's say they're waiting wherever they're waiting. And what are they doing? But they're on their phone on social media. They're scrolling through some type of social media. And I feel like I've been super surprised by how much that happens. But anyway, it shows, I mean, we did an episode on this, the social dilemma, how addicting it is. But also, when something is that addicting and that much a part of our lives, of course it's going to impact us and shape and mold how everyday life is.
I think we're swimming in it, honestly, because I was thinking myself, personal example, that I wanted to do like a break. I'm not a person that I would say is 24/7 on it, but I'm sure that I have spent, more time than I would like, just because, like you said, you can go down the rabbit hole, or we're really kind of plugged in, is what I would say. So even if you're not saying I'm going to go to the social media, maybe you're just checking like flight information or the weather or whatever. It will draw you in.
Yes.
So you get sucked into that. And that's just a small example. I'm sure there's millions of examples that people could give us of their own lives. So I think we don't even know how much we're being influenced. Like, really, we don't.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, think about how many people don't watch the news anymore. They get their news from social media. They keep in touch with family and friends from social media. Some people aren't like, they don't talk to their family, or they just use social media to do that. So it really has become this very, very much molding and shaping a lot of how we do things. And like Instagram, I know there a lot of people are doing business through Instagram. It's almost possible. I feel like it's unheard of. I feel like for anyone to have a business or a podcast or a something and not have an Instagram. And then when you think about, like, recently, Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp were shut down. Remember that they were down. And then there's people whose livelihoods.
Like, I did read about that. They couldn't get their orders. And so and this is what's kind of scary about that, is not that, okay, great, that's a tool, but think of how dependent they are when that company shuts down. That's the danger that I see. That, we're really getting into the whole Big Brother that was, back in the whatever, well, probably in this era where they were talking about the Big Brother, overseeing us. We're living that. And it's funny you brought up the family thing, the communication. What I was going to say is, I know people, they've heard of FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. That's not an issue for me, but what I do notice is that when you're not in the loop, say Instagram's a good example, and somebody took a trip in your family or did something, and everybody says, oh, did you see they were such and such place? And you're thinking, well, I didn't see that. Like, you're missing out on knowledge if you're not keeping up with people. So I think there's an element of feeling like I have to be, in touch, instead of like your old fashioned telephone, you're looking at Instagram to see.
Right. Well, and the flip side of that, I think, is true too. Like, I think maybe in people's heads, they're like, yeah, but I posted it on Facebook, so I communicated it to you. You didn't know.
Right. Exactly. Like there's a party.
Do we realize how impersonal that is? You know what I'm saying? Like, anyway. Yes.
It's crazy. So, so moving right along, this is a really good one. This is about consumption, which I know we've actually probably addressed. All these things we've addressed on our podcast, but I'll read a bit here. The process of consumption is as alienated as the process of production. In the first place, we acquire things with money. We are accustomed to this and take it for granted. But actually, this is a most peculiar way of acquiring things. Money represents labor and effort in an abstract form, not necessarily my labor and my effort, since I can have acquired it by inheritance, by fraud, by luck, or any number of ways. But even if I've acquired it by my effort, forgetting for the moment that my effort might not have brought me the money were it not for the fact that I employed men. I have acquired it in a specific way, by a specific kind of effort corresponding to my skills and capacities. While in spending, the money is transformed into an abstract form of labor and can be exchanged against anything else. Provided I am in the possession of money, no effort or interest of mine is necessary to acquire something. And this next part I really like. If I have the money, I can acquire an exquisite painting. Even though I may not have any appreciation for art, I can buy the best phonograph, even though I have no musical taste. I can buy a library, even though I have, although I use it only for the purpose of ostentation. I can buy an education, even though I have no use for it except as an additional social asset. I can even destroy the painting or the books I bought, and aside from a loss of money, I suffer no damage. Mere possession of money gives me the right to acquire and to do with my acquisition whatever I like. The human way of acquiring would be to make an effort qualitatively commensurate with what I acquire. The acquisition, this is perfect, the acquisition of bread and clothing would depend on no other premise than that of being alive.
Yeah, and then the next part, which I think is really cool, the acquisition of books and paintings on my effort to understand them and my ability to use them. How this principle could be applied practically is not the point, he says. But I think that's really cool. It's kind of like, it goes back to the principle of possession. If you possess something, then you can just do whatever the hell you want with it. You can abuse it. You can, if it's your child, then nobody can tell you that you can't do X, Y, Z to it. If it's your dog, you can do whatever you want with it. If it's your chair, you can whatever. You see what I'm saying? But instead of doing it that way, the acquisition, he's saying, of books and paintings has to do with my ability to understand them and appreciate them and use them. I love that. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. He says what matters is that the way we acquire things is separated from the way in which we use them. That's perfect.
It's super interesting. I haven't thought about this. And honestly, I've read this book before, but I didn't remember this passage. And I really think it's super interesting because he's saying basically you have to put in effort to make money. But you really don't have to put in effort to acquire anything. And so that makes it a totally different situation for, the acquiring of the thing. Like if you had to put in effort to be able to acquire the thing, that would be a lot more human. And I would argue we would have a lot more value. There'd be a lot more value placed on whatever it is that we were acquiring. We respect it more.
Right. Yeah. He says money represents labor and effort in an abstract form, which is exactly what you're saying. And then the part that what you're saying is actually appreciating, I don't think we tie the two. That's why he says that the consumption is an alienated process, is as alienated as the process of production. And I like the part that he says the acquisition of bread and clothing would depend on no other premise than that of being alive, which is something we've talked about a lot on the podcast, like with UBI, and just the fact you're a human being. So you can have bread and clothing,
you can eat.
Sort of basic needs. And so Fromm is really putting into perspective, you're right, it's a different way to think about money and consumption than I think that the way that we've sort of been culturally conditioned to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. And he says that just like production has become an alienated process, consumption has too. So that's cool. I really didn't think of it that way at all.
Yeah. And I think when I think of consumption too, is that we don't relate, we're not relating to the objects. A lot of times we're just consuming kind of mindlessly. And I think that's very true in the society today. And we're not really thinking about, we're not attached to that. We're attached to the consumption rather than the item, as you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
I think it's actually the process of consuming. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. And he says this a little further on page 135, the middle. He says, man today is fascinated by the possibility of buying more, better, and especially new things. He is consumption hungry. The act of buying and consuming has become a compulsive, irrational aim because it is an end in itself with little relation to the use of or pleasure in the things bought and consumed. To buy the latest gadget, the latest model of anything that is on the market is the dream of everybody. So true, man. Think about ads.
New iPhone.
Yeah. In comparison to which the real pleasure in use is quite secondary. That reminds me of going shopping in multiple different places and coming home with 4 different bags and getting home and being like, what did I buy again? Have you ever done that before? I've done that at Christmas.
Yeah. Oh, definitely in a holiday time. You know what? This is also interesting, and I don't know that Fromm, well, he probably did because he was so advanced, thought about the climate change. There's a part here that he writes, we consume as we produce, without any concrete relatedness to the objects with which we deal. We live in a world of things, and our only connection with them is that we know how to manipulate or consume them.
Ooh,
and what I thought about that is, if we're consuming like that, we're not thinking about like the toll it's taking on the planet or other people, the labor of other people.
Yeah. You know? Well, and I've heard him say too, he's saying here it's compulsive, right? And it's irrational. And I've heard him say in other writings that it's an attempt to quell an anxiety that we need, that can only be quelled by self-awareness and slowing down and knowing ourselves, and that's just one way we run away from ourselves, basically, is by buying compulsively,
Yeah. And I know that when I brought up the latest gadget, I threw out iPhone, right?
Yes.
So that segues into something that just blew my mind when I read it, because I know Fromm wasn't living in this era.
Yeah.
He writes, the Kodak slogan, if for people who don't know Kodak camera, you press the button, we do the rest, which since 1889 has helped so much to popularize photography all over the world, is symbolic. It is one of the earliest appeals to push-button power feeling. You do nothing. You do not have to know anything. Everything is done for you. All you have to do is press the button.
Tell me if that doesn't sum up everything about our society right now.
I know. That's what it blew me away.
Yeah. You don't need to know anything. You don't need to have knowledge. Just press the button on Google. You'll know.
Yeah. And then I'll just do a little more here. He says, being constantly occupied with taking pictures, actually, he does not see anything at all except through the intermediary of the camera. The camera sees for him, and the outcome of his pleasure trip is a collection of snapshots, which are the substitute for an experience which he could have had but did not have. Man is not only alienated from the work he does and the things and pleasures he consumes, but also from the social forces which determine our society and the life of everybody living in it.
People are
good.
They're oblivious. And that's exactly how I feel like the powers that be, who are winning the most, and I would mostly say financially, from the way things are, that's how they want it. There's a George Carlin stand-up that I shared with Sonya this week, where he talks about, like, it's a big club and you ain't in it. That's the way they like it. They don't want that. They don't want you to think critically. They don't want you to be intelligent. Yeah, it was funny. There's so much here. I kind of want to start back at the top.
Okay.
And think about the push button power feeling. I mean, I want to drill into it a little bit, just because this is so much of our real day-to-day life. I mean, let's just think about things that we push a button and we feel powerful and it does something. Car is one of them, right? Push the button, start it, right? We didn't really do anything. We just pushed the button. What else?
Buying online, click,
exactly. Buying online, social media,
click,
typing, click, and people follow you, people like. I mean, it's just
dating, click.
Dating. I mean, that's so much of this is we are not engaged, right? We're not actually doing anything. We're just pressing a button. So much of our lives are just pressing. Reminds me of this song that we sang when I was a kid. I don't know if you it goes, "Hi, my name is Jim. I have a wife and 3 kids, and I work in a button factory. One day, my boss came to me and said, 'Joe, are you busy?' I said, 'No. Push this button with your left hand.'" And during the thing, you press, and then you sing it again. And he goes, "No, push this button with your right hand." And then you keep going, and then but that's what we do. Everything is a button to push. Everything. Right. Social, like our apps. Going to the bank is a button. Do you see what I'm saying? It's a button.
Yeah. And I think he's really hitting on something where imagine this was since 1889. He's basically saying that you're getting out of the present because you're just in this process, like where he says about being a tourist, that you're not seeing anything. You're not really experiencing it. You're just, pushing the button for the snapshots.
Even with the pictures. Wow. Well, I love that example about how taking the picture brings you out of the present moment, because that's something that I'm really not. I mean, I will do it every once in a while, but for the most part, I'm not the girl who's like, let's take a picture, because I'm like, I don't want to take a fucking picture. I want to be right here. I just want to experience it,
I know we all live in this world, of course, because we can easily take these pictures with our phones. So one thing, and I probably brought this up to you, Lacey, is, okay, you're in an event and somebody wants one picture. And I'm like, okay, I get it. They want to get a picture. But then in the 20th picture, you're thinking, all I'm doing is posing for pictures. I'm not even talking to people. I'm not enjoying the moment. I'm caught up in this whole, scenario of documenting it. And it loses, then it starts to become really depressing for me, at least.
Especially now with the photos being instantaneous. I mean, not to give away my age, but I definitely was around whenever photos were like you took the film to the store and they developed it for you, right? But now it's instant, right? And so in our minds, while we're taking the picture, we can already be thinking what we're going to do with the picture, right?
Right.
Talk about not being present in the moment at all. This is not about what you're doing right now. It's about what you're going to be able to get from getting this picture. And this is how we lose sight of what really makes us alive, which is a connection to each other and to a moment, to an experience. That's what we live for. This is how we connect. This is how we can truly love. These are the types of experiences that make, in a romantic relationship, the sexual part of the relationship so much more fulfilling, right? And we're losing out on all this because of all this capitalistic greed is the root. Yes.
Yes, we're losing out on life. And one of the things we do when we're reading this, or I do, is I just see examples of this every single day. And Lacey and we share articles or just even anecdotes. And an article that I had read and I shared with Lacey in the New York Times, it was on work. It was called "The Future of Work Should Mean Working Less." And I'll just tell you, it's a great article, but a theme that I love, and it just talks so perfectly with what Fromm's saying, is the author saying, we exist to do more than just work.
Yes.
And the purpose of our human life is more than work.
Yes.
And we need to see the value of each person. And it's interesting, the way the article starts out is people say, I will never spend X number of hours in traffic. I will never miss my son's, soccer game. I will. And they go on telling all their stories because they realize, wow, I'm wasting away in quote unquote a job. And I'm missing what you're talking about just now, even just living.
Yes.
Because we're being forced to go into these jobs that we don't necessarily like and, suffer through, traffic or hours or whatever it is.
And even if we did like it, it's still the same thing, right? It's still using our own powers, our own human powers, for the advancement of someone else's desire, right? And we can be the most alive and the most human and and experience the most well-being when we're doing that for ourselves. Like that's how we're really supposed to be. I mean, if it strikes you funny that we're even saying that we need to work less, that tells you that there's a problem, guys. You know what I'm saying? Hello.
Right.
And there's plenty of countries that don't live like this. I mean,
no.
We've
Yeah.
We've
both
talked
about other places. And I think it's also what the values are, because I would say that, your job or your lack of a job doesn't define your human worth.
Yes.
And unfortunately, we tie that to who we are and what we are. And I think what, I see is that we're supposedly in our country pro-family and, I don't know, pro-morality. To me, it's kind of, it's immoral that people have to define themselves by working. We have to be more than that.
You know what? It's insane. That's what it is.
Yeah, insane.
Listen,
right.
here's a quote from that article. This is really good. As it is, work sits at the heart of Americans' vision of human flourishing. Okay, let's just let that sink in for a second, guys. That is true. Okay. It's much more than how we earn a living. It's how we earn dignity, the right to count in society and enjoy its benefits. Okay, if you're sitting there thinking that's not true, just think about homeless people for just 1 second, and that is true. It's how we prove our moral character. You can't grow up and not work. How do parents measure whether they do a good job with their kids? Are they good workers?
Right.
It's where we seek meaning and purpose, which many of us interpret in spiritual terms. And I think a lot of people would say, but you do need meaning and purpose in life. Agreed, totally. And you need to get it from work. Disagree. I feel like work is a place that we can get meaning and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
However, what we need for meaning and purpose is a connection with other human beings in which we are helping and being helped. We're contributing to the group, to the whole. That does not have to be in the context of work. That can be in the context of living. It can be totally different than work.
Yeah, I second that. In the article, and I don't know if you recall, so I'm just going by my memory, the author quotes, there's a woman she's in academia, and she gets ill, and then she can't work. So she realized by not working, and I think she liked her job. It wasn't that she didn't like her job. She's like, who am I? What am I now that I can't work? And I think she starts painting or doing artistic stuff. So she has to rediscover and find other things, because we're not saying that work, if you like your job or, you actually do get a degree of fulfillment, that's great, but you have to have more than work. And I agree with what you're saying, Lacey, is being a contributing member of society and being connected to something bigger than, your job. And I think people probably found themselves in this situation, no matter what the circumstances are. Like I said, if you don't like your job, or you do, if you can't do that job anymore, who are you?
Yes. Well, I felt that a lot at the beginning of the pandemic, the lockdown. And I think for me personally, I didn't work most of the pandemic, most of the lockdown, and for much of the pandemic so far. I just started really working again in June of this year. But what I took away from it was this realization of how important it is to not work, to have time not working. And that's, actually way more important. It was hard to get there, but I'm glad.
That came out of the pandemic for sure for a lot of people, I believe.
Agreed. I want to sum it up with this, and I know we're wrapping up, but also from this work article, the point is to subordinate work to life. That was such a powerful line for me.
When I read
that. Yes, I was like, okay,
work to life.
Okay, what do I want my life to look like? What do I want? Okay, now how does work fit into that? That's really, a life is what each of us needs to get. wrote Dr. Weeks, and you can't get one without freedom from work's domination. That's the damn truth. That said, she continues, one cannot get something as big as a life on one's own. And I don't know exactly what the implication is there, other than we need some societal adjustments in order to make that happen. Is that what you picked up from that?
Yeah, I think what you said earlier, like I think you hit it on the head, is that it's other people. It's being part of a, connection with other people. That's how I would interpret it. Because you can't do it alone.
Yeah.
That's how I'm reading it.
Do you want to take a second and just make any connections from Andrew Yang's book?
Yes, I wanted to throw out to everybody because I am reading this. Okay, and I'm about halfway through.
Everybody, and y'all know, I'm just going to say really quick that obviously this just came out, Andrew Yang's new book. Of course, Sonya and I are supporters of him. I was working in a presidential campaign, and I'm about halfway, probably maybe a little more than halfway through, and Sonya is also about the same. So there's some great connections to the topics we discussed.
Right. What I'd like to throw out for the audience on this, what's great about Andrew Yang is, to me, he's a contemporary. He's not living in the time of Fromm, and yet he's discussing the same issues that we're talking about. He talks about bureaucracy. He talks about, the value of people with work, like we're talking about. He talks about UBI, which for people that don't know is universal basic income. That's his big push for us to have that, which would allow us, like in Fromm's world, to be caregivers, to be, stay-at-home parents, or to do whatever we need, just to live our life. Universal. There we go. Universal health care. And so he gives a lot. He talks about how our institutions are broken. There's some good examples there, like I said, of the bureaucratization. So I just throw that out there because I think it really aligns with a lot of Fromm's principles. So just check it out.
Wasn't there something he writes in here about the teenager who cracks?
Oh, yeah. So I'll just summarize that.
Yeah.
So during the pandemic, the CDC, unfortunately, which we all, Centers for Disease Control, was in charge of dealing with this pandemic. And they couldn't, to just simplify it, they could not get their act together to compile all the data needed to see, I think, with the testing and who was getting sick. I may be wrong on the facts specifically, but there was data they needed to get together. And they literally, there was nobody who was in charge. Like if it was like a typical example of bureaucracy, you'd ask so-and-so, no, not me. And so Andrew Yang points out that here's this high schooler with no budget, Lacey, and he puts together this incredible chart data. I don't know, probably a whole computer, program, because there's brilliant kids out there with zero budget, and that the CDC, which has millions of dollars, could not do. So there you go. There's an example of how bureaucracy, hurt us during a time of need at the pandemic.
And their excuse was we didn't have enough money to figure it out. That's what they said, from what I recall. And it's like,
that was their excuse. Yeah.
There's the high school kid who gets technology, very highly intelligent. He had $0 and he figured it out. Yeah, that's crazy. Well, go ahead.
One other thing. Lacey might want to plug, she's reading Fromm's book, Beyond the Chains of Illusion. So that has some good themes in it too, right?
You want to, can I real quick?
Yeah, talk about it.
Okay. We're going a little bit longer than we normally would, guys, but it has been a minute, so it's totally fine. Okay, so this goes along with the idea of alienation, which we've mentioned multiple times, and I'm not sure, if that's something that maybe is foreign to you, or maybe there could be a deeper understanding. So I'm just going to read it. It's like estrangement. The essence of this concept, alienation, which was first developed by Hegel, is that the world, nature, things, others, and he himself have become alien to man. He does not experience himself as the subject of his own acts. I love that. As the subject of his own acts, like the reason he's doing it, the active person in the acts. The subject of his own acts as a thinking, feeling, loving person, but he experiences himself only in the things he has created, as the object of the externalized manifestations of his powers. He's projecting his powers onto the things outside of himself instead of experiencing them himself. He is in touch with himself only by surrendering himself to the products of his creation. Let's see. Okay, I think that's enough. Yeah, go ahead if you want to share on that.
I don't know if I'm interpreting this right, but to me it's like he's more invested in the outcome of what he's doing as opposed to being, like you said, like is supposed to being, you said the subject, right, in the beginning?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, exactly. It's about something outside of himself versus him in the midst of it, him being present in it, with it, experiencing it, knowing it, you know? The worker
that's interesting.
Oh, okay, sorry. One last thing. The worker becomes poor the more wealth he produces and the more his production increases in power and extent. All these consequences follow from the fact that the worker is related to the product of his labor as to an alien object. For it is clear on this presupposition that the more the worker expends himself in work, the more powerful becomes the world of objects, which he creates in face of himself. The poorer he becomes in his inner life, and the less he belongs to himself.
That's good.
Wow. The greater his activity, therefore, the less he possesses. The alienation of the worker in his product means not only that his labor becomes an object, assumes an external existence, but that it exists independently outside of himself, that it stands opposed to him as an autonomous power. Yeah, alienation is just like a wow. It's a powerful concept. Yeah.
Yeah, check that book out. It's Chains of Illusion, right?
Beyond the Chains of Illusion. That's a
okay.
Well, it's been
we covered a lot.
Yeah, it's been so good. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And it's Friday night. It's 9:30 on the East Coast here in Atlanta. So if you're gonna go have fun tonight, I hope you have a great time. If you're gonna stay home and have fun and read books and eat dinner, and I don't know what you're doing, but have a great time. We hope you have a great time.
Good to see you guys. Bye.
Yeah, good to see you. We'll see you next time on the Rethinking Humanity podcast. Bye.